I try to bring the male perspective, but I try to bring a sophisticated, emotionally intelligent, enlightened male perspective. So, I'm not the man who's going to be like, oh, if you don't have a guy by 40, you're useless or whatever. Like you hear a lot of, that sort of stuff online. But I'm sure we'll get into this more. I'm also not the man who's going to tell you, like, if you're 38 and single, you're exactly where you need to be in life and you're perfect. Like, you don't want to hear that because you don't feel that way internally. You want to feel worthy and lovable, but you also want to know, is there anything I can do? Is there something that's blocking me?
Okay, well, Kevin, welcome to Quiet the Clock. Thank you so much for being here. Kevin Nahai.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Therapist, coach, speaker. What I've loved so much about doing this podcast is being connected to new people. And I love that you had actually reached out to me and we got on a call and you're like, I work in the space. I am passionate about this space. And I thought that was amazing as a male, that you work with women going through egg freezing or fertility, and you really care about women going through that and you really care about this topic. So
thank you.
Can you share a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and how you became interested in supporting women in this space?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I think what you're doing is amazing.
Thank you.
And it's very cool that we're able to have this conversation in person.
I know.
So thank you for coming all the way from the East Coast.
Yeah, we came just to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, me and everybody else, of course. I'm just honored to be in the rotation.
We're honored to have you.
But yeah, I'm a therapist and a coach and a speaker here in LA. And over the past 5 years, a large contingent of my practice has been women in their late 30s, early 40s who are struggling to find the right person. Mm-hmm. They feel the pressure of the biological clock. Mm-hmm. They feel the social pressure. They feel the family pressure. And as I've worked with them, this topic of egg freezing always comes up. Should I do it? Should I not? There's a lot of taboo around it. It's very expensive.
Yes.
It's not a position that, most people would recommend to their best friend that you be in. It's something that they kind of find themselves in.
Exactly. The guest that we just had on, same thing. It's like, you just don't think you'll have to do this. And that's one of the things I think that ends up being the reason women find themselves at a fertility clinic at 36, 37. I froze at 37 is, you just don't think you're going to be in this position.
Yeah. So that's something that I, have encountered over and over again. And I sort of figured that, okay, if I'm really going to be supportive to my clientele, I need to learn more about what this process entails. Mm-hmm. So I did kind of a deep dive. I met with a bunch of fertility doctors.
I love that.
I partner with 2 of them now, where we sort of collaborate and try to be on the same page and sort of co-manage patients' care.
I love that, collaborative care. Do you mind mentioning their names in case anyone's interested in?
Let me check. I'll check with them first, just because I didn't ask.
Okay, yeah. But that collaborative piece, because I think that the more resources or support you can have in this process is so incredibly important.
Yeah, I'm sure it won't be a problem. We can link it in the episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, I learned like the names of the medications. I learned the cost. I learned about the retrieval procedure, so that way I could sort of speak to my clients, in the same language.
Yeah.
But I also, the most that I've learned is about the emotional and psychological process behind all of this. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I'm a straight male. I will never have to be pregnant. I will never have to freeze my eggs.
Yes.
So
no, you won't.
I'm not sort of the typical person who's talking about this.
I do want to talk about that because one, I think it's incredible that you're interested and you're so passionate about just knowing more and knowing more in order to support your clients. And I'm curious about what your clients' response are to you knowing so much. I'm curious about what their response is to knowing that you'll never have to go through this, that as much as you can know in terms of knowledge and medications, like maybe there's this disconnect into how you can relate to the emotional piece.
Well, the thing is that a lot of the clients that I've had don't have a strong external source of support. Particularly if they're from immigrant families, you tend to see that the parents are not so supportive of this. Sometimes they don't want to talk to their friends about it because it can be a source of shame, unfortunately, which I'm sure we'll demystify.
Yeah, yes.
Sometimes if they're newly dating someone, or if they're single and they want to get into a relationship, they're worried about how they're going to bring it up. So I know my limitations. I always tell them what I'm telling you, like, look, I'll never have to go through this. So I'm not trying to pretend that I can put myself in your shoes, but I can definitely be a source of strength and encouragement and support as you go through this. And I also happen to know a bit about the process so that, that way you don't feel like I'm completely on a different page.
Yeah. And I thought it was so great on our call. You're like, okay, I'm not just some weirdo reaching out to you. I actually enjoy, I know this space. I work in this space. And even just hearing you talk about it now, you are so well versed in what women go through and just like the shame and how to bring it up on a date. Like these are all the things that do come up.
For sure. And I also I think this is one of the reasons that my clients have felt comfortable with me. I try to bring the male perspective.
Well, that's huge. We always want them. We want the male perspective until we don't want the male perspective.
I was going to say, you only want the male perspective if it sounds, nice.
You're right. It's true. It's so bad, but that's so true.
I know.
You're the fourth male we've had on. And you're 100% right. We do want the male perspective, but some of the things we're hearing are hard to hear. And it's not that they are untrue.
Right.
But it's not really what we want to be hearing. But I think incredibly important perspective.
Well, look, I try to bring the male perspective, but I try to bring a sophisticated, emotionally intelligent, enlightened male perspective. So, I'm not the man who's going to be like, oh, if you don't have a guy by 40, you're useless or whatever. Like you hear a lot of, that sort of stuff online. But I'm sure we'll get into this more. I'm also not the man who's going to tell you, like, if you're 38 and single, you're exactly where you need to be in life and you're perfect. Like, you don't want to hear that because you don't feel that way internally. You want to feel worthy and lovable, but you also want to know, is there anything I can do? Is there something that's blocking me? And when it comes, sorry.
Go ahead.
And then, when it comes to the egg freezing thing, I think what I've experienced is that a lot of women are terrified to have this conversation with men, either that they are newly dating or that they're going to start dating or whatever. And I really believe, because I've seen it over and over again, that if you are dating somebody who has a certain level of emotional intelligence and you tell him you're freezing your eggs, he is going to respect you for that. And he's going to see that as an insurance policy that you are taking this seriously and you are not just living in a la land that you don't have to take precautions against this.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Wait, there's so much to unpack with everything you just said there. Okay.
So let me just say right off the bat, I'm not here to say, don't tell guys, you're going to scare them off. They don't want to hear that. That's all nonsense, right?
Agreed.
Obviously, there's a certain type of guy who's going to be scared off. But if he is on a date with a woman who's 35 or 38, and he's not smart enough to know that fertility is going to become a part of the conversation at some point, then you're probably not on the same wavelength to begin with.
Right. We had a guest on here who was going through her egg freezing on a second date with her husband. Well, future husband, wasn't her husband at the time. Second date with this guy that would end up being her husband. And, you have to do the shots at the same time every night. She excused herself from the table, did her shot, and she's like, I'm going to come back and tell him. And he was like, great. Good for you. I think that's great. Now they're married. And I think you're right that there is a certain kind of man that will respect that and be encouraging of that. And then there's men that are not. Lots of questions I have based on what you just said. Let's go with how much do men actually know about the biological clock? And how much do they know how much pressure it could put on a woman? Because I think we're talking about anxious attachment and anxious dating. And I think that this pressure does inform how we show up in dating sometimes, whether we like it or not. It does. And I'm curious to know, how much men kind of are in tune to that or know that there is a biological clock. Many women get stressed out and pressured by that.
So I don't want to, paint men with a broad brush, just like I wouldn't say all women know this or don't know this, right? But I think, obviously, speaking in generalities, most men understand that fertility starts declining at 30, that by 35, it declines precipitously. I think, whenever I'm talking to my guy friends and stuff, there's always that question like, oh, well, how old is she? Right. There's a reason that there's this question.
So they are thinking about it. They are thinking about it.
They are thinking about it, right? They are aware. Okay. However, I think there are two limitations to that. The first thing is that they are not aware of how acutely aware most women are of that pressure.
So true.
Right.
Yeah.
So even the woman who is posting on Instagram, like I said before, like
We have to talk about that too. Yeah.
we will,
Yeah.
just like live your life and like blah, blah, whatever. It's all good. Like this kind of, quote unquote empowering message. It's not actually empowering, and we'll get to why. But even the ones who are saying that like they are not concerned about this, deep down, they are concerned about it in my experience. So I think that, sometimes guys and sometimes parents and even other women will say like, oh, she's 34. Like she needs to speed up. Like she needs to pick up the pace here. She already knows that.
Right.
Right.
No, we don't need to be told that. We
Exactly.
are feeling that internally so hard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they, again, I don't want to speak on your behalf or the behalf of other women, but my experience has been that they're already acutely aware of that pressure. And I think that
Yes.
men don't truly understand that. The other limitation is, in addition to the fact that they may not know exactly what the process entails, and then they may not, necessarily have the tools to communicate about it. So I think that they should, make themselves more aware if they're going to.
You should teach them all this stuff.
Thank you. I try.
You should. No, you should start like a workshop for men to understand this stuff.
Yeah, it would certainly be helpful.
Very much so. Yeah.
But I think the other limitation is that even though they know that women have this biological clock that they're very aware of, they are not always conscientious about protecting the woman's time.
Okay, let's talk about that because we also talked about, yes, tell me more about that.
Okay, so this has two sides to it. So the first side is you may be aware that a woman has a timeline that she needs to abide by. Obviously, there's, we have great technology these days. Egg freezing has allowed you to have a kid later in life, thank God, et cetera, right? But if we want to play it safe, you want to be sort of within the boundaries if you can.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
If you can. It's not everybody's situation. I think that guys know that, but I think that when they get involved with a woman, if they haven't made up their mind before getting involved with her, what?
Go ahead. I'll share my story. Go ahead.
Okay.
After you're done.
Did I make you uncomfortable?
Not at all. I'm not
Okay.
uncomfortable at all. No.
Okay.
I'm happy to share all of my things.
If that man hasn't made up his mind before the first date with her that he wants to get married and he wants to have kids and he wants to do it soon, and that if there are challenges, he's going to roll with them, then he's going to become enamored by her. They're going to become involved, and a year, 2 years, 3 years are going to go by, and he may have just wasted some very, very precious years of her time.
Yeah.
If he didn't make the decision beforehand that he was ready for this.
Whose responsibility is that at that point, right? So maybe it's a shared responsibility. Whose responsibility if a year goes on, 2 years go on? Well, and I'll share with you my journey with Rob, but whose responsibility is to say, hey, I don't think men take that responsibility to say, hey.
Well, they don't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But that's why I said there are two sides to this, right? It's a double-edged sword. The other part of this is that a man will often waste a woman's time, but a woman will often waste her own time.
Speak to that.
Right? So we've just established that she's often acutely aware of, her situation and the fact that she wants to be on a certain timeline. But just as the guy is susceptible to grow feelings for her and to want to make it work, even if they're unclear about their timelines, she is also susceptible to that.
Yes.
And especially what I see in my practice all the time is if you have a girl who's been dating seriously since she was 22 or 24, hasn't found the right guy, finally finds the right guy at age 35, she wants to hold on to him.
Yeah.
Right? But then a couple of years go by, and to answer the question of whose responsibility is it, I think, as you said, it's a shared responsibility. But, you really, if somebody, I think that it's your responsibility if you have the timeline, because you cannot, and I'm not trying to blame the victim here at all, but you cannot assume that other people will be as conscientious about protecting your own time as you would be.
Yeah. I think you know my story without telling my story, but I think what you said is so right. It's like, for me, meeting Rob at 34, I had been in a lot of long-term relationships, and then I was single for a while and dated a lot of people. I knew what was out there. I knew sort of the quality of things out there. And I knew when I met Rob at 34, he was very different. And he was just it for me. And I love him very much. And he offered and brought things that no one else had brought, secure attachment, communication.
Shout out to Rob.
Rob's the man. I love him. Love you, Rob. And there was a moment there that I was like, I would never want to give this up. And, I think when I met him, when I met him at 34, I was kind of like, life is going to evolve the way that it's going to evolve, whether that's marriage or kids, I don't know, but I'll be happy either way. Now, fast forward, I get to be 36-ish, and the, pressure, timeline, clock, everything starts ticking, and we weren't aligned there. And so it wasn't something that we went into the relationship being like, do we want these things? I was kind of like, you're great. I love you. This is fun. Let's do this. And it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years into the relationship that I'm like, okay, what are we doing? For us, it worked out. But it wasn't a conversation we had up front. I didn't initiate that conversation because I didn't want to initiate that conversation. But
did you know what you wanted at that time, or were you still in like an exploratory phase?
I wanted to be happy. I had good relationships. I never had great relationships. I dated shitty people. Like, I had bad picking, the bad picker for a while until I figured my shit out. And at that point, I just wanted to be happy, and I just wanted to be with a good person. And that's what mattered to me most. And then, so I wasn't saying I didn't want marriage or children. I just was like, I want to be happy.
I see. Okay.
I watched everyone else, you see other people in not great relationships or not great marriages doing the traditional thing, and they're not really happy. And before meeting Rob, that was my decision. Whatever my life is going to look like, I want to be happy. But then, I grew to love him very much. I loved his family, and I just saw this future with him that I wanted. I wanted to have children with him.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, what was hard was our timeline did not align, but my biological clock was ticking. So that's why I froze at 37 while in a relationship with him. And then, it did work out for us. So I think everybody's story is different. But I think as a woman that, you do desire that partnership, that secure attachment, that relationship. But it's so hard because when you don't have it and you find it, it's hard to let go of that.
Yeah.
Even if they're not going to want the same things as you. And then and I did come up against a hard decision. It's like, if he's not going to want this, I'm probably going to have to walk away from this relationship. So
I think if you were my client, 10 years ago or whatever, I would have said 2 things to you based on this story. And it's amazing. And I'm so happy that it worked out for you.
Thank you.
The first thing I would say is, just for anybody who's listening, who might be in a similar situation to where you were at 34, is get really clear on what you want. Yeah. Right. And this is not to say that you think you did things incorrectly. You did things beautifully, and it worked out beautifully for you. And I'm so happy about that.
Thank you.
But you're also saying that it caused some hardship because you knew what you wanted at 34, and then a few years later you encountered this struggle, right? So the first thing I can say is, the clearer you can get on what you want, the better it will be for your own peace and for your relationship if and when you meet that right person. Yeah. So if you know that you will be okay not having kids, as okay as you would be if you have kids, then that's great. You have a little bit more, leeway to play with. If you know, there are some people that I work with who since the time they were like 18 years old, they absolutely know that they were born to be a mother and they won't have it anyway. And they'll even go so far as to get a sperm donor by themselves if that's what it comes to, right? So if you know that, then you have to lead with that. It doesn't mean that when you sit down at the dinner table, you order the pasta and then the next question is like, so are you ready to put a baby in me? You know? And I don't think most people do that. That's kind of a trope, but
Yeah.
but it, you do have to lead-ish with that. Like that has to be a conversation early on.
Yeah.
And then to that, of course, people will say, oh, well, aren't I going to scare him off if I tell him like...
That, of course, is the narrative. That's, of course, what women come up against and where they kind of, waffle whether I say something or not or how I say something is that fear of scaring someone off.
Yeah. And you know how you're going to scare him off? If he is afraid of that.
Well, exactly. Because if he's not afraid of that, he can hold space for that.
And that's all it is.
That, yeah. And it's almost better. It's almost better to just lead with what you want and know whether or not they want it.
Absolutely.
It did work out for me. It was a lot of hardship. Rob's going to be pissed that I'm talking about this, but whatever. I'm not sure I would recommend that for anyone. There was a lot of heartache for me there.
You'd recommend what?
I would not recommend my mine worked out.
Right.
So I'm blessed and grateful, but it was really hard. It was really, really hard.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying for anybody listening, like Beth's story worked out beautifully, but there was hardship in there. So to the extent that we can prevent that, I think that getting extremely clear on what you want, A, and leading with what you want, B, is gonna prevent some challenges and some hardship.
Yeah, and that's part of doing this podcast and sharing my story and being vulnerable is like hopefully it safeguards some people from some heartache or where I was too. When I was really ready to have children and wanted that, it colored everything. Like things I would get upset. I'd get upset about things I would never get upset about. Like this idea that I was waiting or that I was wasting time. Like if Rob was late to something, I was like, see, I'm just waiting around for him. Like it just eroded a lot of things. It colored a lot of things. So that was what was really, really challenging and hard. And that's why I say don't recommend that for people.
Yeah. Well, that's, I think, why you and I do what we do, Beth. Like, first of all, we love people and we want to help people. But secondly, we went into this space of mental health because we had our own challenges and we probably made a lot of mistakes and learned things the hard way.
Yes. Which is usually how you learn them.
Yeah. I think, they say a smart person learns from their mistakes, but a wise person learns from someone else's mistakes.
Well, I wasn't always the wise person, unfortunately, but
me neither. But that's why we're here.
Yeah.
And look, that point about scaring the guy off, I really want to reiterate that. The only way that you will scare him off, and this does happen. I'm not trying to gaslight you into thinking that, that there aren't guys out there who will be scared off by this. They will. But that is only if they are afraid of what you are proposing. And that's why the deciding before the date is so important. I want to share 2 anecdotes.
Okay.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
So the first is I went on a very prominent, famous podcast in New York City. I'll leave the name out. Mm-hmm. And I had this conversation about stating your intentions early on, and, how many people you should date at one time and stuff like this. And on the podcast, I was recommending that within the first 1 or 2 or 3 dates, you state, if you are looking for this, I want to be married and I want to have kids. And the woman that I was talking to, she said, if a guy said that to me on the first date, I would run away in the other direction. And as we got more and more into the conversation, it turns out that she is a very avoidant type of person. Yeah. She doesn't enjoy these types of conversations. And her plan when she got together with her now husband and father of her baby was not to have marriage and children, right? So she was turned off by that because that's not how she operates. She hadn't thought to herself about what she really wants, and she's not, she was
afraid of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So that idea is not going to be palatable to somebody who's afraid of that or hasn't really tuned into what their heart wants.
Yeah. I think the frustration, again, not to generalize, but I think the frustration for women is this feeling that All men are afraid of it.
But that's not true.
I know it's not true, but sometimes it feels like that.
I totally understand why it feels that way. A lot of men put that out. They put that energy out. A lot of them are still in their F-boy phase, you know, but I promise you that it's not true that all men are afraid of that.
Yeah. And I don't want to unfairly generalize. I think that, and maybe there's something to, you know, obviously who we choose and all of those things, but I think fear, like we just get the sense that men are afraid of these things, like of having children, of the commitment of marriage, and women want those things.
Well, a lot of the time we think that we want something, but wanting something and being prepared for it are two different things.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Let's talk about that.
So, you know, they say, you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. Have you heard this phrase?
Yes.
Okay. It's kind of true. It's a little bit too simplistic, but just to use that as an example, if you keep attracting men who are emotionally unavailable or afraid of commitment, you want to use that as a jumping off point to ask yourself this question. Instead of asking yourself, I want to get married, I want kids, why do I keep attracting this type of guy? Flip the narrative for a second and ask yourself, why don't I want to get married? What am I afraid of? What are my fears and obstacles? Even just the fact that I think men out there don't want this or they won't be open to it is an obstacle in and of itself. Maybe there's something deep down in me that actually doesn't want commitment and doesn't want kids.
Yeah.
And is afraid of those things because the experience that I've had is showing me that what I want is not available to me. So that's a block in me, right? So if you can look at what is happening and take that as an opportunity, take that as a mirror and look within yourself, then magically, I see this happen over and over again.
I bet, yeah.
You're going to start attracting a different type of person.
It's just having that ability to turn the mirror on yourself. And that's what I did. And that's, I think, what, you know, invited Rob into my life, because I was like, you know, I was choosing the emotionally unavailable people. And I'm like, okay, you know, why am I picking these people? And then understanding that about myself allowed me to see Rob more clearly. I was getting in my own way, wasting my own time because I wasn't understanding what was coming up for me. And I just told the story just before on the last episode. I thought I was open. I thought I was open to meeting somebody until somebody like stopped me in my tracks and was like, you're not open at all. I was like, oh, damn. So I had to stop and really look at myself. I think, yeah, that's the turning point. That's when you can change the game and be more successful in dating and maybe get more clear on what you want.
Absolutely. So instead of looking at your dating life as this landfill, it's just like pile of shit where nothing's going right, you know, look at it as a mirror, right? And hold the mirror up to yourself and ask yourself, you know, am I holding on to a negative energy that perhaps is stopping me? Do I have traumas that I haven't worked through? And then of course, look, you know, there are people who are doing everything they can and they've done a lot of healing, and then it's a matter of timing.
Yeah.
You know, but my problem with the self-help movement on Instagram and books and podcasts and stuff is that it is skipping to step 10 out of 10. Okay. And what I mean by this is steps 1, 2, 3, all the way through 9 are look within yourself. Fix yourself, get a therapist, get a coach, change your energy, learn to become more optimistic, have more faith, relinquish control, etc.
Relinquish control. That one's tough.
Yeah. Learn how to communicate properly, right? Love yourself. Steps 1 through 9.
Well, and the beauty of that too. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
It's okay. Steps 1 through 9 are all of that. Step 10 is you're doing everything you can. You are where you need to be. Trust your process. Patience. Yeah. The right person will come.
Well, and the beauty of 1 through 9 is like, it's not just going to serve you in dating. It's going to serve you in everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this quote unquote empowerment and encouragement that we see in this space is skipping to step number 10. We are telling people, instead of telling them what you and I are talking about here, which is get to that fulcrum, get to that turning point within yourself. Use this experience as a mirror. Cultivate your faith. Learn how to communicate better. Learn how to be confident in yourself, all these things. Instead, we're skipping over all of that and we're just telling people, you're great, you're good where you are. Everything is supposed to happen at the right time. That's a message that people should be hearing down the line once they have laid the
I
foundation.
think there's so much bad messaging out there. And I think that's why these conversations are so important. And I think the time piece might come into play too, because that stuff takes time. And when you're 34, 35, you know, you might not want to dedicate the time to that, or you might feel like that's the waste of time, which is not true at all, right? And
Exactly.
it might be daunting and overwhelming to be like, oh my God, I have to do step 1 through 9 before I can meet anybody. And you're just like, I don't want to do it. I need to meet somebody yesterday. But the value and the shift in what happens when you do that is tremendous. And it is what's going to make you successful.
Well, let me clarify something. I'm not trying to say that you need to be whole or complete
Sure.
in order to meet someone, because that's another piece of internet nonsense, is this idea that like you need to be 100% on your own before Mr. Right or Mrs. Right will
Do you know
come into
Stan
your life.
Tacton? Do you know his work?
Yeah.
Oh my God, love
Wired
him.
for Love.
Yeah. He's great. Yeah,
I love
he
him.
speaks to that a lot. That
Yeah.
you can learn secure attachment through relationship.
100%.
Yeah.
And that the relationship is the context in which a lot of the healing actually occurs. Right? So my sort of heuristic for this is you don't need to be 100%. You don't need to have completed steps 1 through 9. They can be in process, but you need to be 60 or 70% of the way there, right? So your airplane doesn't need to be a decked out private jet, but it needs to be safe enough to fly.
Oh, I love that.
Right? So you would not step onto an airplane that you knew had a broken wing or a faulty engineering system. That's when you see a person who has issues up the wazoo and your fixer mentality gets in there. Don't step onto his or her airplane. But
Oh, I love that. Do you use that? Like, I love using like metaphors and symbols, like symbols
I
in
think
my work because it just lets clients like really like attach to something.
for sure. But on the flip side, if you're dating in good conscience, you would not let somebody step onto your airplane if you were aware that you had a broken wing or a faulty engineering system. So we have all these people out there who have broken wings. They have stuff that they need to work on that is stopping them. And we're jumping to step number 10 and we're telling them, you're perfect the way you are. Just wait for the right guy to come on the plane. But that's not going to serve him or you, right? You have to first do the internal work, as they say. But the caveat is you don't have to be perfect, right? It just has to be in progress.
I like that. I think that's like less daunting and overwhelming than saying like, you know, be perfect or like, yeah, that's why I love Stan Tacton's work because he's not like, you don't have to do the 1 through 9.
Yeah, there are two pieces of like pure unadulterated crap that float around in this space, okay? One of them is you need to be single on purpose. You need to be 100% healed on your own. All of your childhood traumas need to be sorted out before you're going to be in a relationship, okay? That's horseshit, excuse my language.
You can curse, that's fine.
The other piece of nonsense is what I've been talking about, which is you're perfect the way you are. You're exactly where you need to be. It's just a matter of timing. That's also nonsense. The truth is somewhere right in the middle.
Yeah.
Which is you have work to do. I have work to do. Get that work in progress. Finding your soulmate is more an inside job than it is an external expedition.
Yeah.
Right? But you don't have to be perfectly healed. Because if you're in the right relationship, so much of the healing and fulfillment is going to occur in the context of that relationship.
I think that's it's incredibly helpful to hear. And I think about all the narratives, and I'm sure you hear them all too, all the narratives that come up, especially for this demographic of women that are, you know, mid 30s, late 30s, 40s that haven't met somebody and are egg freezing is, you know, they don't want to settle. Right. And so maybe they're looking for the perfect guy that's already healed, that's already done the work. And I don't know if you see this show up in your work, I'm assuming you do, but with some of my female clients, it's they're not willing to open the perspective on someone different or someone outside of what they've chosen or someone outside of who they have envisioned to be their partner or the father of their children. And, you know, there is this narrative or thought that comes up that by suggesting that you do say open up, it's like, well, I don't want to settle. I don't want to settle. Do you see, I'm sure you see that in your work.
I do. And I hate the word settling. I really hate that whole concept, because here's the truth. Finding somebody who is good enough, first of all, is not settling. And secondly, finding somebody who is good enough is incredibly rare. It is extremely difficult to find someone who's good enough.
See, I hear what you're saying, but I already know women are going to hear this and say, good enough is not good enough.
Well, hear me out.
Yeah, I'm willing to hear you. I'm already like projecting it down the line when this goes on, you know, goes live.
So first of all, my definition of good enough is not that you're miserable with some guy who sits on the couch, smokes weed all day, and bosses you around the house. Like, that's not good enough. That's miserable.
Right.
My definition of good enough is also not that, like, yeah, you're kind of happy, but you're like not really fulfilled and stuff like that. My definition of good enough is that you have 3 or 4 pillars. One is you have the same values. 2 is you have a similar vision of the future. 3 is you have attraction and chemistry. And 4 is you can communicate with this person.
I love those pillars.
Right? Now, all of the other stuff, trust and honesty and respect, and like those are they're kind of like they're non-negotiable.
Right.
You need to have those there, right?
Right.
But finding someone that you have the same values, you have a shared vision of the future, you are attracted to them, and you don't want to rip each other's heads off when you're communicating is extremely rare. I don't say that to discourage people. I say that the reason I'm saying this is if we understand that over the course of a lifetime, you have about 5 to 6 potential soulmates. That's it. If you ask spiritual teachers, they'll tell you this, right? You have like 4 to 6 people with whom you can actually have a nice, fulfilled, stable, calm life. It's very, very rare. If you find one of those, you're going to be happy with them.
I think the clarity of those pillars are so helpful, and deciding that that's what is important to you is so helpful, because then you know what you're looking for. I think, unfortunately, sometimes those pillars look very different for people and what they're telling themselves is important to them. So I love the way that you broke those down. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah. And look, every person has to have a hierarchy of importance, because you cannot prioritize what's important to you all on the same level. So you meet men and women who are, they're what I call maximizers. You know, a girl who, for example, wants a guy who's 6 feet with green eyes, already financially established, you know, has a house, is ready for her to just walk into his life, has worked on all of his emotional baggage, right? You're trying to maximize across all categories. You need to decide which one of those things in order is most important.
I have a funny story about that. My friend had this waxer. She's like this cute little Russian lady. And she's like, you ladies, and she's so old. She's like, you ladies want this, you want 10 things. She's like, you get 2.
Nah.
2 of those things. But it's all those kind of more superficial things like
Sure.
weight, eye color, financial status.
Sure.
But you can't have all of them.
You can have all of them, but not all prioritized at number 1.
Well, I think that becomes the problem. It has to be all of those things.
They all have to fall into a hierarchy. And men do this all the time as well. They're like, I want a girl who's in great shape. She's, 27 or under, and she doesn't have baggage, and she's not going to be emotional, and blah, 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 right? Like, you can have all the things that you want, but you have to decide what is in order of priority. And I can tell everybody who's listening right now that there is one thing that is more important than anything else. If you have this as your number 1, you're already ahead of the game.
Which is?
You and your partner need to have identical values. You need to value the same things in life. You need to have a very, very similar mindset on what is important to teach your kid and the principles by which you live. If you have that, your marriage or your relationship can outlast most troubles that come up. If you have different values, then your marriage is going to crumble.
Yeah. I think what's important about just sort of, the narrative around time or wasting time is that there's so much value in experience. And I think through dating, through relationships, through experience, you start to learn what your own values are. You start to learn the ones that are important. And, I had other long-term relationships before Rob. And I, at this point would never say those were a waste of time because I learned so much about what I wanted, what I needed. I had a 5-year relationship before Rob, and, his family was, broken and dysfunctional. And, I thought I was okay with that. And that sort of was one of the things that led to the downfall of a relationship. And I left that. I learned that was important. And I left that. I said, I want to be with somebody who was raised similarly to me, had the similar values. And, and that is Rob, and that is Rob's family. And that has supported the success of our relationship so much. So I think, when the narrative of wasting time comes up, I try to encourage people that nothing is wasted, that there's always, if you're looking at it in the right way and you're taking something from it that is going to serve you in the future, there's like no wasted time.
Absolutely. And one thing to highlight about what you just said is I hate when people are shamed for being picky about what they want. Like, you wanted a guy who wasn't from a broken family, so to speak. And a lot of people could look at you, Beth, and they could say, oh, well, that's so messed up and judgmental. You don't have any control over what happens in their family, and you should accept the person for who she is, who he is, blah, blah, blah. You're allowed to want what you want, And I think that part of the narrative around this settling thing is there's so much pressure on people to not be picky. There's so much pressure on them to, just take whatever is given to you kind of thing, that, yeah, of course they become afraid of settling.
Yeah.
Right. So we should not be shaming people for having the values they do or wanting the things they do. If you want a rich guy, that's great. If you want a tall guy, that's fine. Right. The only thing is you have to understand that, first of all, if you find somebody who is good enough, that's very rare. And good enough is great. Because if you've got those pillars covered, you're going to have a happy life. And secondly, there has to be an order of prioritization.
Yeah.
Right. So if having a rich guy is your number one thing, that's fine. But then numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5, they have to go below that. They can't all be
number one.
At number one.
Yeah.
And here's the reason. The reason is that if all of your things are number one, then you actually price yourself out of the market.
I've heard that quite a bit. Yeah.
Right. So you want to have high standards of respect for yourself, but you don't want to have such high standards of what you expect from the other person that the other person becomes illusory.
Yeah.
We all have to operate within the current dating market, and the current dating market has a lot of people with a lot of baggage who haven't done work on themselves and don't have all the things you want. So sure, it's, sometimes it might feel like finding a needle in a haystack, but you don't want to price yourself out of the market. You want to have high standards of self-respect, but not such high standards of expectation.
Oh, yeah. I think that happens a lot.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we wrap up, I want to talk quickly about this. We talked about the nuance piece, and you mentioned a little bit earlier about, there's a lot on there about in social media of like 38 and traveling the world and all of these things. And you and I talked about that in our previous call of just how that could be a little problematic, that being the messaging, right? And sort of what is the balance between being grateful for where you're at, but also planning, if you want children and partnership, like planning, being proactive and strategic.
Well, I think you relay that nuance really, really effectively.
Thank you.
I've seen some of the things you've posted, I've listened to some of your conversations. So first, tell me, what's your perspective?
I think there's got to be a balance to it, and finding that balance, because I know for me, I made the mistake of being too fixated on what I didn't have yet, that I wasn't focusing what I had now. So I do think some of that messaging is encouraging and is helpful to say, hey, just because you're not married and don't have kids doesn't mean life is over or your life is less than. But I do think that there is this piece of reality that, if you do want children at a certain age, you have to start to think about it. And who knows, you only get a surface level of what people are actually going through. But, you can't base it all on what they're posting. So maybe they are thinking about that. But I think there is a balance, and I think there is an importance to be grateful for what you have now while also planning for what you want in the future.
Yes, that's beautiful. I would add to that one thing, which is emotional authenticity. And what I mean is, I've had clients who are this type of Instagram, they promote this type of Instagram messaging of like, you're 38, you're traveling the world, you're living your best life. Like, just be grateful for where you are on your journey and stuff. If you peel the curtain back a little bit, they're not happy. That's not what they mean.
Yeah.
That is a trope that has been sold to them that they are now perpetuating. But in our heart of hearts, even if you are the most free-spirited, hippy-dippy, trust the universe person on earth. And I love all that stuff, by the way. I pray every day and I meditate and I go to an energy healer.
Nice.
Like, I'm not bashing that stuff.
Yeah.
But even if you are all of that, in our heart of hearts, we are born and bred to attach and to be dependent on another human being. It doesn't mean that you are not also self-sufficient, right? But healthy dependency is not a preference, it's not a choice, and it's not something that's up for debate on Instagram. It is a biological, physiological, and psychological necessity. So no matter how much we tell people that, the single life is great, even if you're happy being single, which you should be, right? There is still a lack of authenticity. And the truth is that your life with the right partner would be better. And that in your deepest heart, that's what you want. And I think that there is so much power and liberation in being able to admit that. If you can admit that, then you can start the process of getting closer and closer to that.
Yeah, I think it gets hard to admit that because then it could introduce or invite some sadness around not having it.
There's so much sadness around not having it.
Yeah.
And it also, part of the reason that people post this facade on Instagram and make books and podcasts out of it around this one very concept is that if you can disavow what you want in your heart, then you're lowering your expectations. If you can admit to what you want in your heart, then your expectations could be disappointed. And that's a very scary thing to embark.
Totally.
I'm sorry, that's a very scary thing to confront, right? But the power that you gain from being authentic with yourself in what you truly want, in addition to the fact that that allows you to now start to approximate and approach getting what you want, is invaluable.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, don't make Instagram your boyfriend, right? Or your girlfriend. Like, don't go to social media or books or podcasts or gurus to validate your existence and validate where you are in your life. What you need is self-sufficiency and self-love and a partner. And that's what you want in your deepest heart. And anybody who says otherwise has either just been burned many, many times and they're scared.
It's their defense mechanism to say that they're not. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We could talk
course.
for hours. Unfortunately,
Yes.
we don't have hours, but tell everyone where they can find you.
Thank you so much. This was an amazing conversation.
Amazing. We'll have to do it again. There's much more to talk about.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. You can message me online. My Instagram is Kevin Nahai. Also, my TikTok or my website, kevinnahai.com.
Okay. Kevin, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Beth.
If you like the episodes that you're hearing and you want to hear more, please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more incredible stories and tools.
When I froze my eggs at 37, I felt alone, I felt unsure, I felt confused and uncertain. And when you're considering such a big decision, feeling those ways do not feel good. So we have created a step-by-step guide to egg freezing so no one else has to feel that way. If you are considering egg freezing, if you're curious about what the process looks like or what you should be thinking about, then this guide is for you. We were really thoughtful in how we put it together. I think it's a great guide. I think it's really comprehensive and covers a lot of the things be thinking about, to be considering, and maybe some things you didn't even realize you should be thinking about or considering. The goal is to not have anyone feel alone in this journey. So if you're thinking about this decision, sign up through our website, quiettheclock.com, and make sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at quiettheclockpod. This is a very big decision, so I don't want anyone to feel alone in it. So if you're thinking about it, grab this guide, and you can also DM me with any questions. I'm here to support you through this decision and this journey.